we'll open up this meeting of the Education Committee, welcoming everybody that's joined us. Thank you all. Excited to see you. We will start off with any public input. Is there any public? It's all people that we know.
Sometimes we know the public.
I'll entertain a motion for approval of the May 9th minutes.
Move to approve the minutes from May 9th.
I will second.
All in favor? Any opposed? And it carries 3-0. Awesome. So Dan, let's review.
Okay, so I made a blank document for the next thing in terms of Education Committee priorities for 17-18. I didn't make a blank document for this because I wasn't sure what we wanted to memorialize. But I can, because that's the magic of Google. I can do that right now if there's certain things we want to write down. But, you know, the Education Committee, you know, for this year, we had one presentation from each school. Mm-hmm. We talked about preschool a lot during the winter. And we kind of left that hanging a little bit after we saw Fuller and the preschool during March, I believe. We had a couple of ad hoc committee meetings as well as normal meetings where we talked about dual enrollment, and we'll go back there a little bit later today. We started the year with that IKF graduation policy, and we haven't come back to it really, and that's okay. We could talk about that too. And those are the major thrusts that kind of happened this year, but I wasn't sure what else you guys wanted to do with this time.
Being new, more of looking at where we've come, what we've accomplished, what's been going on, which would be great to have Michael at the table as well.
Where would you like me to sit?
Right next to Dan, if you want.
As long
Yes.
as he's
So,
approved.
Mr. Maddie is currently up in Marlow
Yep.
tonight, and then Miss Frazier had some family commitments because her granddaughter graduated from Keene Middle School today. But Michael could come,
Yes.
and Mr. Millay is obviously here, so.
So just maybe looking at where we've sort of come in this past year, and then if the two committee members who have actually been on this committee for the past year want to reflect on maybe what the committee's done as well, what's worked, what maybe hasn't worked, maybe where we've gotten sidetracked, where we've accomplished a lot. So that when we get onto the next bullet point, we can sort of direct how strategically we want to tackle next year. But I'll let Michael talk.
So where would do you want me to start with 16, 17, or do you want me to
Sure.
talk 17, 18?
16, 17.
16, 17. So I think I know I presented to the larger board back in October, and I would say kind of a lot of things that we were looking kind of at that point are kind of similar, kind of when you're kind of looking at the year in totality. So if you're looking at it in terms of, I'd say curriculum, still kind of keeping in place some of that mapping that we've done kind of K through 8 in Keene, where we have standards aligned units with performance-based assessment, both in English language arts and in math. And so kind of holding fast to that idea, at least for now, of having 3 units in English language arts and 2 units in math. And so that's kind of where we still kind of stand, and sort of that sort of I'd say application and implementation with schools, classrooms, and teachers. These some things that kind of aren't kind of memorialized in the math that I think we'll probably talk a little bit about as we kind of transition into 17, 18, is we probably are aware of some of the changes with science and kind of the state and the adoption of next generation science standards. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I know that's been something that kind of, I would say over the course of the spring, that's something that schools have kind of expressed some, I wouldn't say concern's not the right word, but they're just intrigued and they'd kind of like to know more about that. And I know part of, some of the workshop, early release time that we spent this spring kind of focused on some of that work and some of those issues, and what does that even look like, and how do we kind of create something going forward so that seems kind of reasonable and manageable. There's just a couple of things that come to mind. Is there anything else, Dan, that maybe?
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
over?
one thing that we started, around November was kind of this push towards standards-based report cards.
Yeah.
That'll be a huge theme throughout next year. This goes far beyond Keene. This is about all the SAU kind of coordinating together, which I think is a really exciting thing. The tentative plans, and these are very tentative, kind of based on how much progress was made this summer, is to, by the 18-19 school year, potentially have a kindergarten, first, second, third, through fifth, common standard-based report card for the entire SAU. And just math and ELA. That is definitely a bold timeline, and I think what you see is people are excited about it, which I think is good.
Absolutely.
And Michael and I and Dottie have done a lot of work to make sure that we have keen and town representative grade level teams meeting this summer to start that process, and then create a clear vetting process throughout the year to get to that point in time, and also make sure people are ready. So that's been kind of interesting to see that evolve from November to now, and that's going to continue out throughout next year. So that'll be a big theme, I think, for next year.
Yeah. And I think what we're seeing is, I think you can kind of tie curriculum, but kind of it piggys back off of what Dan's saying, which is there's enthusiasm, I think, both from Keene and from towns to really get to a common place. And so it's actually an area where I think kind of both parties can kind of help each other. So I would say there's a great amount of enthusiasm amongst Keene teachers to kind of do that work. But because we already have towns that have standards-based report cards that exist, it's kind of this merging of sort of like enthusiasm and knowledge. And it's really just, at this point, when we're thinking about the summer, trying to get people in the same room to just kind of create a draft. And so most of the things that we've kind of messaged Dan and I to, I think, principals and teachers is, like, yes, we have timelines, but they're very, what we call emerging and tentative. And yeah, sure, we have goals of, hey, maybe fall of 18, having an ELA in math, K-5, like common standard SAU report card. But emerging and tentative are the kind of the watchwords there. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet. So.
And the exciting thing I've seen is, I saw it happen in the committee, I forget whether it was January or February, where some of the towns shared their standards-based report cards. And, a lot of the Keene teachers I've interacted with at the elementary level were asking for an updated report card for many years. So I think when they kind of saw what some of the towns have done, they were really excited. They would have to go far outside of our system to figure out how to pull this off. It's merely using what we already have and kind of streamlining it. And I know, Julia, you had lived in school districts that had some of these report cards in the past, so you were excited about them too. So
It's helpful as a parent
Yeah.
to know at the beginning of the year sort of where your child will be at the end.
yeah,
And just because it's on there doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get there at all,
yeah.
but it means these are the things we'd like to get there. In some cases, they got majority of the things
Yeah.
are done. Might be first quarter, might be the last quarter, but it's nice to be able to see that as a parent.
Yeah.
So the end hope is that there will be continuity amongst all of the sending districts all the way up through.
It really helps. It really helps. I mean, again, we're not in a place where like everyone must have the same resource or the same performance asset or the same exact everything. But being more closely aligned on the standards for each grade level is really going to help. I don't know. Is that a good way to talk about it?
Yeah, and I
Okay.
think what's kind of consistent is, right, it goes back to sort of like what those standards will look like, and that's where the summer work comes in. What will look different, and it's not really kind of maybe the purview of us, is really like, depending on your district, depending on your school, maybe those work study habits that are also assessed might look different, and kind of recognizing that those can look different, depending on where your child might attend.
Have there been any conversations with other SAUs that send to the high school as we sort of establish with our entire sending population up through the middle school, this very common way of reporting, and Rob might have the answer for this.
Actually, we do have some other SAUs that send students either to us in middle school or the high school. And back in January, we invited them to come into all of our committee work, not just in ELA or math, but I mean, even science, social studies, data specialists. So we've put out an open invitation for their participation in our committee work that we do throughout the SAU. The call hasn't been answered, but we'll keep trying.
Yeah, I mean, just coordinating our own SAU is a lot of work, but then everyone else, it's even more.
The one thing I wanted to point out too, sometimes people hear it'll all look alike, so they think it'll all be alike.
Yeah.
Just because the report cards are similar doesn't necessarily mean that it's taught the same in the
Yep,
classroom.
yep,
There's still that freedom.
Yep.
It's just a kindergartner, for instance, may count to 100. How they're taught will probably be different. I just wanted to say that, because a lot of times, sometimes people get a little afraid when we say it'll all be the same.
Yeah.
I think if you look forward as well, with the work that they're doing at the high school with the competencies, this is going to be
Yep.
a really
Yep.
nice fit and progression.
Yep.
So it's some pretty strategic stuff, but it's going to take a little time to get there.
Yep.
Yes. Because also looking at this past year, we had Carol Tolman again this year,
Yep.
bringing her back next year. How is that looking at? Because I know that with Dan going,
No,
maybe how we're working with Carol going forward as well.
so our plan for 17-18 is to keep kind of our partnership going with Carol, but it's going to look different, not in terms of, say, frequency. So the idea is still the same, to have her work, kind of fall, winter, spring, like we've done in the past. But say who she's working with, that will look a little different. So recently what we've done is, it's been K1 and 2 and sort of kind of continuing that sort of work, but it's very sort of job embedded, specific, kind of relevant to that school context and to those classrooms. What's going to be different is we're going to try to scale back the amount of involvement K1 and 2 and try to do more work with 3, 4, and 5, and we're starting that kind of kicking off with summer workshop with our 3, 4, and 5 teachers around a couple of modules from kind of letters training, and then kind of extending that work again to those that kind of 3 times a year. So yes, that involvement is still there. It's just kind of maybe it's still going to include K1 and 2, but it's just going to kind of maybe pull that back a little bit because she's had some involvement now.
And what she would say is our K1 and 2 staff have graduated in some ways, in the very nature of K1 and 2, you are working on those foundational reading skills and writing skills. So when she's going to work with the 3, 4, and 5 teachers, we should have built all those skills in K1 and 2, but we know that's not the case where every kid is where they should be. So a lot of her work is kind of building that background knowledge with teachers and figuring out how do those interventions look? How do those small group times work? How do you target kids who are really struggling? So it'll take on a different flair, but I think it'll be good because I think we're all seeing this 25 to 30% kind of move through our system that we know we're not reaching. And what I've seen directly from just looking at the data very closely over the last couple of years is the people who have implemented her work with fidelity have made tremendous growth in their classrooms, and the kids are doing really well. So I think that's what we want to try and tackle. So it'll be similar but different.
Yeah.
And looking sort of even further, after you said sort of K1 and 2 has graduated, how are we looking at keeping Carol's work sustainable in the district, in the sense that we might have people that leave and go to another district or come in? Is there any way to sort of maybe target people who might be able to be trained by Carol or be able to offer that training maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a great conversation for next year to set up future years, because I think what you're starting to see, especially within the reading specialist group, you're starting to have a tremendous amount of knowledge base within those 4 at each of our buildings. And then how that gets spread, I mean, that would be a huge part of it, I think, yeah. I mean, we're not there yet, but I think it's on everyone's radar.
Yeah. That's the one thing when Carol is a wealth of information, but I know that we definitely cannot afford to have her staying every single year.
Yeah,
and that was one
that's
thing
true.
when you said that they graduated, that I was like, ooh, what happens when we have people moving, when we have people coming in, and making sure that that stays cognizant.
How much do you want to talk about next generation science standards?
I mean, we could talk a little bit about science
Yeah.
if you'd like. I think there's some
Yeah.
stuff more on the state, kind of talking back about the kind of adoption of next gen, and if we're thinking about a timeline in terms of, we know that kneecap is going away. This is the last year we had kneecap. We
Science
still,
kneecap. Science kneecap.
kneecap science.
Yeah.
What we don't know is what that next science assessment looks like. I know that the state, just from the people I've talked to, that's been put up for proposal, and that they've kind of reviewed some examples, but that's really all, I think, the kind of extent that's been released publicly right now. But what we do know is that in spring of 18, there's going to be, whatever test that may be, is going to be piloted in spring of 18. And instead of having grades 4, 8, and 11, it's 5, 8, and 11. So there's that little switch with 4 and 5. But again, to be clear, it's a pilot. But yes, it's still like assessment and with science. We just don't know what it is. But in spring of 2019, that's when the test kind of is formally counts for those federal accountability and reporting purposes. So where we are, I would say, as a district in Keene, is trying to figure out, okay, we know this is here, so how do we best get our teachers and our students ready, kind of, not just for spring of 19, but kind of, we really have to think about this as sort of a multi-year process. So yes, maybe there's that top-down pressure of testing, but also thinking about, hey, there's these big shifts from the old New Hampshire science frameworks to next generation science standards. And like maybe a layman's way of thinking about it is think of science less as a noun and more as a verb. And that's probably a better way of kind of thinking about next gen. Okay?
Yeah.
So really a kind of our process is kind of start some of that curriculum stuff this summer with people kind of across the SAU. What I've tried to kind of put together is kind of using our content specialists to kind of help our K-5 crowd, or those teachers, kind of get more familiar. I think what you'll find is our content specialists seem to be, our science content specialists seem to be a little more kind of very knowledgeable about that, and that's a key resource, I think, for us in terms of trying to figure out, okay, what do these things really mean? And what does that really kind of mean maybe for what we already have kind of stated as curriculum? And then how do we kind of go back to that? What does science in a world where we want science to be a verb really look like in our classrooms?
So to keep on your radar for both the budget process and the education process is, 6 through 12, science teachers, they're content specialists. They're going to feel very comfortable with science. K through 5, you have to be the master of everything. So there is going to be more pressure to kind of shift to these standards K through 5, while we're still obviously not done with figuring out ELA and math necessarily. So the best way to support teachers, and what the district definitely invested in years ago, was science kits. But obviously those science kits are from 15 years ago, from a different generation. So the lead science teachers, I was able to work with them to find some potential pilots, and they're gonna pilot some of them next year, in some of the grade levels, and kind of test them out. And there's some other ones we're looking at too. It would still be a multi-year process to figure that out. It wouldn't happen all in 1 year, but I think there could be potential requests in terms of updated and new kits, because I think it's really hard to be planning for ELA, math and science, and all these things every single day as an elementary teacher. So science kits are a very good resource to really help build a strong foundation to kind of minimize how much time and effort an elementary teacher needs to put in. So have that on your radar, for future years.
Just even more layman, I think the work with the next generation involves unpacking the science standards to understand what they fully mean, and identifying some of the resources that are going to help deliver instruction.
Do you have any questions for that? Moving to you two and George and anybody else. Looking at the committee's work over the past year, I know we started the conversation before the board meeting last time about sort of the committee structure, how the committee tackles its meetings, and looking at how that's worked over this past year, and maybe looking for a way to maybe be more efficient or a way to adapt that. Are there any thoughts over how sort of the past year has been with committee structure?
I think we struggled a little bit because of weather, and we had to rearrange our meetings a little bit. So we changed the structure, but I can't necessarily say the structure is even better or worse because of that. I do think we may want to not have schools come in as early. For a couple reasons. I think it gives them time to prepare at the beginning of the school year for all the things that are happening at the beginning of the school year, and not have to be coming here to report out to us quite so fast. So focusing more at the beginning of what work or what we're going to get accomplished this year, and then bringing them in. That's part of my thoughts.
Christine?
I think, in addition to the school reports, I just keep thinking of how sometimes things have worked on policy committee. If we have a policy of on a particular topic that administration, teachers, and staff who are really working on that particular topic, my parents too, have been able to offer input that is, just gives a lot of different sources of information that help get the big picture of what's happening, and that could be helpful in our work in this committee, especially if we are, or you are, if you are working on things that are driven by our educational policies. And some of that could be changing with the change to competency-based education. I don't know if that's going to have an impact on the policies we have now, but just broadening the conversations about some of the topics.
So maybe moving less from a reporting way and moving more into an action-oriented.
It depends, because I think they both have value. And there's so much going on in the district, it's really important to continue to get that feedback from the schools. But are there times when a different structure to the meeting is helpful? I don't know. Just a thought.
No, I think that's a good idea. I think part of it is how do we struggle with getting people to come in and provide the input inside of the meeting. I think we all get a lot of the input outside of the meeting, but struggling to get the teachers here or other people in at our meeting time. So maybe we can come up with a way to get them here. That would be great.
Well, George has been waiting patiently.
I'm wondering, we cut back a little bit on the reporting this year. Mostly we just asked for them to be shorter. And some of them were really valuable this year. But I'm wondering if it's worth it's a lot of effort and time for the schools to put those reports together. And it takes up, a good 2/3 of our meeting time to have two schools reporting to us. I'm wondering if we only need them to report once a year. And I hate to give up that feedback, and we would have to replace it with something else. We can't operate in a vacuum. But, maybe something like the format you're just talking about, where we target people for specific issues, or, maybe we go to them, I don't know. But having just one report from each school, we would have to probably put some more effort into figuring out exactly what we want them to tell us. If we can't say, all right, the next time you come back, answer these other 7 questions. We got to have our questions ready in advance. But
I would also add that, and any teachers I speak to are very respectful of the process that we have and wanting to maintain that, but also have a way to join in the conversation about things that are important to them. When we have our meetings, we always say we have public input and they can do that, but beyond that, is there a format that addresses that need?
Yeah, I was going to say 2 things. I want to comment on some of the things. I think moving to the 1 report per year this year was a good move. I mean, there definitely was a point in time where the 2 reports per year served a purpose. I think we've kind of passed that time. I think I was even more hands-off probably than even last year. So I think in terms of making it a real targeted, clear presentation, you should map out exactly what you're looking for. But I think 1 a year, no one's going to complain, right? I don't think so.
I didn't hear it.
My second piece of advice to kind of build off what Christine and Julia were looking for is, remember, school board, its main function is policy. So you want to find those things that intersect well with policy. A perfect example is truancy. You have a school system that's worried about it a lot more right now. we're going to potentially mobilize around it in different ways next year while there's a new policy coming online. What a great way to invite people to talk about that policy in the Ed Committee and then talk about some of the things that are going on. So you want to find those nice interactions, and that's how you're going to get more people and get more engagement. So really look to those policies that you're looking for. And, sometimes down the line that graduation policy and competencies is going to come up, probably not next year, but, sometime. So those are the things you want to look for, the intersection with policy and what's happening in the schools.
I mean, I think we want to make sure that when we have Jim dragged out to come and do a presentation, that it's meaningful for him and not just, I'm coming out to play a PowerPoint. Jim has a life and works very hard, and we don't like to waste his time. But I think that's where maybe making those times of intersecting with policy and intersecting with things that make our educators' time a little bit more valued, asking for input around that rather than just, let's just put together a PowerPoint and then that's all we do. Maybe that's how we engage a little more, as you were saying, get people in to engage in a conversation that includes talking about their school and not just, let's show you pictures and talk about what we've been doing and then answer a few questions and then leave.
I think we do both. I think we invite them in when the policy relates to them, but also I think it's important for us to know what's going on in the schools. And those PowerPoints, as much work as they have to put into it, they actually do help us to understand, because it's hard for us to get to all the schools all the time. So I think it's beneficial to have that, but like you said, maybe having that one, but also on the other side, when we're working on policy, inviting people in to participate.
Christine and then Rob.
I was just going to add in that when they have done their presentation, sometimes it has been something that we've asked for, something it's been something they've wanted to share. So it's happened both ways.
So I think my question, and I've shared it with many of you, is to kind of identify what the work is. And if the work is to hear reports, then that's what the work is. But what are you going to do with that? What's next? Okay, we heard from Keene High School. All right, next month we've got the middle school. Then what? Kind of need to look at what the work is. And I think what Dan was alluding to makes a lot of sense of what the actual lift is for the committee, is to look at the policies that are educational, such as truancy, such as competency, such as graduation. A lot of those, the instructional, the I series, make a lot of sense as well, and seeing kind of where we are with the policy. Is it being followed? Does it need to be revisited? Those type of things. But I think identifying what the actual work is, otherwise you're just going to get reports, and you're going to hear reports, and then what? All right, so it's great that Education Committee knows, and here's, and we have the schools come to the full board once a month, and they get a watered-down version of the report. What are we looking for? Identifying what we're looking for, and how the work of this committee meshes with the work of the Finance Committee, meshes with the work of the Facilities Committee, and the Policy Committee. And that's not an easy answer, because otherwise you're just going to be a sounding board of a committee. That you're going to keep asking yourself, well, what are we doing? And we said there's too much on the Education Committee's plate, but when you look at it, it's like, well, what's the lift? The lift is we tell Dan to go get this report ready, and we're going to hear it the next month. There's not much of a lift for the Education Committee, and that's a tough one to answer. I think it's something we really need to look at.
If I'm not mistaken, and this was probably prior, I'm sorry, it's okay. Prior to me coming on the committee, part of the reports stemmed from the strategic plan, and that's kind of where it started from. And so having it be more of that type of a thing, where it's linked or tied to things that we're working on in the different schools may be more beneficial. So we get an idea, we know what we're pushing towards, and then we're actually hearing okay, where they are, how it's going,
Yeah.
and what else do they need to get there.
Anything else?
I was just going to add in, it's also our opportunity. We are a conduit to the community at large as well, and parents may come in and talk to teachers and principals in the schools, but other folks don't, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying it becomes just a sounding board. We can submit the report to you, you can read it and
Right.
be the conduit that way, rather than
Yes, oh, yeah,
having
yeah, yeah. No, I'm not
staff
arguing
come and
that.
March in and
Right.
the dog and pony, I
Right.
think, is not what you're looking for. I don't think anyone's looking for that.
Right.
Yeah.
One more piece to think about to kind of build off everything too is the data piece. Now, I gave you guys a fire hydrant's worth of data in September. Obviously, you know, I won't be able to summarize what actually happened this year, because some of it's not going to be public yet for a couple more months. But it's something that I can kind of leave for Dottie and Jim Wallace and maybe Michael and Rob to kind of come back again. And I think you are going to want to figure out how you keep a pulse of what the kids are actually doing and what they're actually achieving as you go forward, and how that relates to policy, how that relates to everything else. Because that's the ultimate goal. That's why we're here. We want our kids to do well. And, you know, you don't want to lose sight of that, too.
Awesome. I like that. And we can definitely work over the summer maybe to figure out what our mission is, what our lift's going to be, and how we want to structure how we do that. So, next on the agenda is looking forward. Yes. But looking at that, we do have dual enrollment, and it's sort of on this item agenda and in the next item agenda. And I know that Jim has been waiting patiently, so maybe if we want to, maybe have that
Sure.
intersection now,
Yeah.
get that moving.
So I dumped a very quick thing in the drive today for you guys. Kind of an update of where we're at.
Always prints them when I print. Never fails. Got an extra copy now.
So, you know, this was meant to be a quick recap from probably the last time we talked about it, because, you know, weather kind of messed us up, and we did two school presentations in May, rather than kind of coming back to it earlier. But on May 23rd, Julia, myself, and three basically Keene High School and Cheshire Career Center staff went to the New England Alliance of Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships, you know, the NACEP. And it was actually, I thought, a pretty worthwhile day where we got to interact with multiple higher ed institutions and K-12 institutions around this dual enrollment piece all over New England. Anything else you want to say, or?
It was, initially, it was heavy from the higher ed side of it,
yep.
side of things, so we were able to hear their side, and then it kind of transitioned from the high school piece of things.
But, you know, I thought it was great to hear, you know, so we had a couple presentations, and then there's a couple breakout groups, and then, so some of those things that I think we picked up from that day, I kind of informed in this document. So I'll just kind of run through them, and we'll see where we go. I mean, you know, it's been clear that, I know that the board wants us to expand dual enrollment. We've had it for a long time in the Cheshire Career Center classes through River Valley. We did one pilot with River Valley on the Keene High School side last year. It had many logistical and programmatic issues. I think Jim and I learned a lot from going out to Concord High School earlier this year. I forget the exact month, it's all a blur. But they kind of gave us their tale of how they were able to not have advanced placement and dual enrollment be in competition, and how they're able to kind of nest both these programs together and expand organically around the school. They clearly have a good partner at NHTI that kind of helped really work with them on a lot of logistical issues. And it seems like they've been able to set up a nice partnership there, and they've been able to grow it organically, where they seem to have a really good culture in the building around it. I think what we saw from some of the ad hoc committee meetings, Julia, and Christine, did you ever go to some of the ad hoc committee meetings? Okay, I remember. Obviously, the high school is worried about this competition between AP and dual enrollment.
Right.
I mean, I think it was great to see that it doesn't need to be this way, but clearly within the building, there's politics around it. So I think, you know, that's still a work in progress. So I think my advice is, we don't really have a clear policy right now. Going back to our earlier thing is, this committee should work on a policy around dual enrollment with higher ed. what is it you're really looking for? What are really the big goals that the school board has around it? I think that'll really help kind of map out some of the future for it. Because I think there is some worry that any growth in dual enrollment is at the expense of advanced placement. That doesn't need to be the case. And I think we kind of saw that in Concord earlier this year. The NASEP conference I thought was really good. I think what they really did is they really helped frame the target audience for why dual enrollment has gotten bigger. The big presentation we saw was from the University of Connecticut. They have a ton of resources. They're a
Right.
big state school. They've made a huge push for this in Connecticut, so, and they kind of tout themselves as the model in the country. So we got to see like a really strong model. But they really kind of target three types of kids. What they're pushing this for is they are definitely trying to catch kids who would not normally go to college or not normally go to community college or not get a certificate. So they are trying to attract them to that realm. They're also trying to attract kids that perhaps want to make that step but are really worried about the economics. I mean, everyone knows how expensive college is. So I think any advancement down dual enrollment and earning these credits in high school was giving those kids a leg up. And then they're also pretty clear that for the kids that are kind of already on that path, maybe the finances are not as burdensome. This helps them beef up their resume and really target where they want to go to schools and really target maybe the majors they're thinking about. So in that way, it becomes a broader program of how they can expand. So I thought that was a really good, I think, learning piece I got from them. The other thing that was clear from the conference is, within New Hampshire at least, you have SNHU or the community college system that we can pursue. And it sounds like SNHU has definitely been growing around the state in terms of kind of working with high schools around this, along with obviously the community college system that has been doing this for a while. I would say, and this is me personally saying it, I think River Valley has been a frustrating partner on this in the last couple of years. I think they consistently show up to meetings where we're trying to solve this problem, but it ends up being their agenda. When we had one recently in the last couple months, where I think, Keene High School and myself, we put a good effort to be like, how can we make some progress? And they were talking about new programs they wanted to sell us, to kind of be as specific as possible. It doesn't mean that it can't work. It just means we have to be really careful about these partnerships. So I kind of put in that recommendation is I think it's good for us to talk to SNHU, kind of see what they have to offer. Their main campuses are not that far from us, and they seem to be growing in their partnerships around the state. I think what we also learned this year is Oyster River as a school district and Hanover as a school district do have special partnerships with UNH and Dartmouth. We have a couple colleges right here in this town, and I think if dual enrollment is something we really want to pursue more robustly, let's pursue those local resources too. So I think we have a lot of paths in front of us. Another thing that was kind of a surprise when Jim and I were talking to other districts, some schools have made tremendous growth down this area. One of them was being Rochester, and the school board has actually put funds behind it. They have basically subsidized their students taking some of these classes at the local community college. That is definitely one way to probably see more growth. But then, that could help. That's a Pandora's box too, because then what do you do about AP? What do you do about all these things? Do kids actually have the same skin in the game if you're paying for it? Things like that, But I think Rochester, at least, I've seen other school districts kind of talk about them in terms of like the big moves they've made because they've done that. Something to think about. There is a new partner at River Valley. What's his name, Jim? Jerry. What is it? Jerry Bell. Jerry Bell. He did a really good job of kind of bringing this up at the conference, where one of our big stumbling blocks to make this kind of like a reality is the high school teachers need to have a master's degree. And he was really challenging that, because one of the main themes that kind of came up in some of the breakout sessions was when you get high school teachers together with college teachers, they learn a lot from each other. High school teachers have a ton to offer higher ed, and higher ed has a ton to offer high school. So he was really kind of pushing back, like, we have some really experienced high school teachers that can do this work, but you're holding them back and you're creating barriers for them around the master's piece. So I think he did a good job kind of advocating for us and really thinking about that. Concord has that relationship with NHTI, where they not every single teacher needs to have that master's to have the dual enrollment credit. River Valley has so far not been interested in doing that with us, and I get it. They have their own things to figure out. I'm not sure what I really feel about that, or I don't think we've built consensus as a group yet, what's most important. But that's a huge logistical hurdle for us. You know, about 48 to 50% of our staff don't have a master's. So that is definitely a logistical limiting factor. And then I think the last piece I wanted to share with you guys is, what I really got out of the UConn presentation is, they make a huge effort to get together with their high schools every year. So they gave us the example of, you know, they had Latin dual enrollment. So you have all the Latin teachers all over Connecticut interacting with the Latin department at the University of Connecticut. That's a great way to get a lot of Latin teachers together, and they really appreciate it. But it's basically really helped make a strong partnership in kind of what they do. You know, right now, our dual enrollment doesn't really require too much interaction. We don't have this, you have to meet yearly and you have to check in with each other, and, you know, it can be very peripheral in kind of how it happens. So I think as we go down this path, we really want to think through, or I think the school board wants to think through, what are we going to require of our higher ed institutions? If they're going to give us credit, what do we want out of them in terms of that relationship? So that's kind of where we're at. I think that, you know, there is definitely possibility to target a few departments and a few classes next year if all the logistics work out right. That's kind of where we're at. Yay, do enrollment.
I like it. Looking at sort of Dawn, I mean, some of these could have the potential to have budget impacts, and maybe this is one area that we can sort of put on the finance helping education, where we look at the educational component. It's really, and a lot of the things that we've talked about are things where if there's a financial benefit, fantastic, that just makes our educational backing a little bit easier to be able to do it. But I think this is one of those things that we can sort of tick into two boxes that we can sort of share with finance across investigating these different things. If this is a cost saver, then maybe we need to start pushing this relationship more with another college university. And as we do that, how is that going to be our savings? Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it means we're increasing money and we need to be prepared for that if we decide that we need to go forward in that.
The other thing that Connecticut was saying is they charge, not because they have to, because, like I said, it's a small amount. I think it's
Yeah.
like $35 or something.
It was really cheap, yeah.
But
Yeah,
because it was important that the parents pay something.
yeah.
They found that was, you know, they needed to pay something in. So I think we need to think about, you know, not necessarily if we're going down that route, necessarily paying or covering everything, but how do we share in the cost? And the other side was, the reason that it's so cheap for them is it's a benefit. Part of their charter is outreach. So when we're having these conversations with these higher institutions, that's, you know, reminding them that's a part of why they exist, and maybe lowering those costs to be able to assist with some of this too. And that's what they do. They bring their costs down because of the outreach. And I think he said, 85% of the kids that are in that program apply to UConn.
Yeah.
So there's a real benefit for it. Only 35% attended,
Yeah.
but 85% of the kids ended up applying to the college later. So there's a real benefit for the college to support the high school as well, and, you know, kind of blending those relationships. We're thinking about finance.
And I mean, especially where I don't think that River Valley is necessarily our only partner, and I think that we're in a place of strength, especially since Keene State College can be an incredible resource. And the college definitely has seats that they would love to fill, that they would love to have people in their classroom engaging with their students and faculty, or even their faculty being able to engage with ours, if that means it's going on at the high school as well. So I think that maybe we need to act from a position of strength and be like, listen, we don't need you. We've got all these other options.
I don't know, I think that would be wise, because I think the more competition, the more our kids are going to benefit. And I think, you know, UConn gave that example where, I forget which class it was. It was like, because all these kids were in the dual enrollment class, they could have less history classes, so it was like, then their department could offer more things at the upper level. Like,
Right,
when we were
yeah.
saying the benefits, I forget exactly what it was, but it was an overall benefit for them, too.
Yep, absolutely right. I wasn't raising my
Oh, I
hand.
thought you were, okay.
Oh, it was
The point.
I think it was the, like English. They
Yeah.
have like 900 kids
Yeah.
in freshman English. Well, if they offer it in high school, they don't have to worry about having 900 kids come in. They've already had it. And so it was a benefit for the college. So having those partnerships where we're strategic in the classes that we're offering as well as it benefiting the college, those partnerships would be stronger.
Well, if we get there too, and we're offering the freshman English at the high school, the cost should naturally be
Right.
considered because the college is not paying the instructor.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I
Absolutely.
mean, that's where your negotiation power comes in.
Don.
Yeah. I don't have a mic. Do I need a mic?
Yes.
Just left. Okay, just left if I don't have a mic. So I think it's a great idea to look at this and look at the cost, only because I have an example of my son took AP Stats in high school, took the test, went to UNH and had to take stats again. So I think that connection would be really good in understanding the cost savings going forward and making sure that those alignments do work, because just that cost savings altogether for
Yeah.
parents, for
Sure.
students. Okay.
And I think that it makes our students more competitive, because I know that I went to school with many people who were already graduating with half their degree done. And it sort of makes our students more competitive to be able to, as you say, resume builder, but also to be able to do more offerings in their college career, and save them money as well. I wanted to sort of look over at Jim and sort of figure out what the pulse is at the high school with dual enrollment, and what teachers are maybe thinking about how they want, what kind of support do they want. Dan talked about, oh, in Connecticut, it's like everybody gets together this many times a year and they all get together and they talk. Is that something that the high school teachers are necessarily looking for? Are they looking for more training, or just somebody that oversees their curriculum and he's going to tell you to have a mic?
I believe at the high school level, the Career Center is working really well. It's a model that could be used around the state, how it's working at the Career Center. At the high school, I believe we have such a diverse offering of courses. I think that we have to come up with a plan that's succinct. I know when we went to Concord was like, research it, reach out to other institutions, and they were saying that we should partner with Keene State College. I don't know if Keene State College is going to play. We went to the River Valley and we asked them about signing off, having a lead teacher, and like Mr. Black just said, that they were opposed to it. Finding where it's going to fit in is the difficult piece. And we've been looking at it, and it's definitely a shift at the high school. Not only with, the competitive piece with the AP, but it's with teachers, the certification that the teachers have. We can't, with the multiple sections that we offer, we looked at Spanish, we looked at the world languages last year, we looked at English classes last year, we looked at social studies classes. And with the multiple sections that we offer, it was hard to offer it for one class only. It would be a scheduling nightmare if we were going to do it. The other piece that we found when we look at the curriculum, some of the curriculum didn't line up. We had to be careful. That was one of the issues with Spanish. So I believe that we still have to look at it. We have to talk about it. I think it's an opportunity for students. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. It's just how it's going to fit in and keep the wheel rolling down the road.
Related but unrelated. One of the things I wanted to say was that Connecticut talked about how much they enjoy having the teachers come in and the amount of wealth that the teachers brought in. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation too, that their professors were learning so much, and that's sort of where you go back to saying that the curriculum didn't line up. They talked about how much their professors were learning from the high school teachers And we're bringing some of that into their classroom.
Yeah, and I think, we went through mythology in one of the classes right now, and Jeremy Vandekern he's on board with the dual enrollment piece. And he met with the college professor at River Valley, and he altered the curriculum a little bit. They compromised on what was being offered, and the class was offered with Jeremy Vandekern. But again, that was through the teacher. It wasn't us telling them that they're going to teach it. Last year with the 2 English classes, they were the only, we did Lit and Lang through our comp class, and those were the only 2 teachers teaching that class, and they both had their master's degrees. So they filled out all the paperwork, and the college approved that course to run at the high school. The other piece that it opened up was there were some other hurdles that we had to go through with IEPs, and we got through it. Nothing was insurmountable, but again, it was a big wake-up call for us on getting everything over the goal line.
I don't remember anything coming up as it relates to IEPs in the training we went to, or any conversation. Yeah. It's just I'm glad you brought that up, because I forgot to think about that side of
It
things.
definitely is an issue. I mean, it's
Yeah.
something you have to look at.
Well, it was something we weren't aware of when we
Yeah.
started down the
Yeah.
process. But again, River Valley worked with us on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, as you guys really think about crafting a policy, it's really articulating, what do we want for our students? I think about which students we want to target. I think I gave you 3 groups to think about. There could definitely be more. And, yeah, I mean, there are these logistical hurdles right now. We definitely have to go down the path where AP and this coexist, or there's just going to be too much of strife to really make it work. And then the master's pieces, we have to get around that so the schedule still works too, because
Yeah, I think the other piece is too, how many institutions are we going to start partnering with? If we, I think we have to really look at that. We're hearing about the University of Connecticut, Southern New Hampshire, Keene State, Antioch. We have to think about this thoroughly before we start diving in. Right now, it's just been River Valley.
Oh, no, I agree. I think we should start with one.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of the high schools in the state who have grown their
Only do
program partner with several, and they're still growing. They're still adding partners. But I think for us to go out there and start with several partners at one time would be too overwhelming.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we're in a really good position to say, you don't want to play ball, we don't have to be here.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of the colleges are going to say that. I just think, that they're bound by certain requirements also, as far as teacher certification, and that's the piece that we have to overcome. I believe if the master's degree wasn't an issue, I think that we could I think the staff would be on board. I think we'd get more staff members that would be on board. I think it would be not seamless, but there'd be a lot less hurdles that we'd have to overcome with scheduling, with multiple sections.
I'm just curious, how often do you, with your schedule, I know every year you guys kind of look at it, but how often do you guys sit back and kind of say, this is what we've offered for a certain period of time? Or is that a continual thing, or is it?
We go through the program of studies every year.
Okay.
And there's a calendar that we have that we can send you about the
To
process
adjust,
that's
yeah.
used. And it's something that we have to look at.
Yeah.
But we do look at it every
on a
year that,
year-by-year basis?
absolutely.
Okay.
And, now we're under the mindset that we're not adding anything without taking something off.
Right.
Yeah, so sometimes enrollment drives that conversation. Sometimes it's philosophy and
Yeah, I
interest,
think I'm more about the philosophy,
Yeah.
less about the,
But I think the competency piece that's moving down the tracks right now at a pretty quick pace is going to force more of that philosophical discussion
Right.
in the future.
okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. So, looking into maybe some of the priorities that sort of we got at the reorganization meeting and we talked about last month as well. In looking at feedback, obviously Rob is working sort of on scheduling and everything, but as we enter into a negotiation season, a negotiation year, I think that looking at scheduling broadly is going to be pretty important when we're working with finance and with personnel. If we're looking at something 3 years down the road, if it's start time, if it's whatever it is, seeing what that vision is and trying to figure out what we want so that we can understand where we want to go from that point. Any comments from either of you about going with that? Thank you both.
As it relates to the contract?
Not so much with the contract, but how to sort of maybe start that conversation. I mean, I know that Rob's looking at start time. I don't know if at the high school you're looking at any sort of going with block scheduling.
In January, February, the schedule came up in conversation, and we said we're going to wait with the schedule when the competencies start to roll out and look at the schedule at that point in time. When did they present for the competencies, the core team? In
January?
I remember Ms. Hay was asking that question, and we were like, we'll put it together when we get our competencies out. So, but Mr. Malay has said that he's looking at the schedule, he's looking at the late start, he's looking at everything.
Yeah.
So, you guys already have, you have your committee for competencies and everything already, right? So
Absolutely.
you're in, and,
Oh,
I mean,
we're
not
in-
competency, I said that wrong. Scheduling and time, the start time, and, or have you gotten the start time committee going yet?
I have not, but
Okay.
maybe, I don't believe
Rob was doing it, start time. I know people have talked about block scheduling at the high school, and that's been a conversation since I was a student.
It's been a conversation since I've been there.
But I know that sort of, not saying it's going to happen like tomorrow, everybody watching. But as we enter into a contract that's going to be 3 years long, we don't want to necessarily be in a position where we're like, oh, we want to start looking at this and then deal with a contract issue. So maybe trying to figure out broadly what we want to look at 3 years down the road when it comes to how that's going to work out in our contract, so that when our negotiating team is going in, they understand where the vision of the administration and the board is on scheduling, on competencies, and when that's going to sort of go in, scheduling on both block and time. And I think that also fits into the finance committee in when we look at what's good for student education on the side of what Rob and what the high school is going to look at and what all the schools are going to look at, if we look at also what's feasible at the same time. And I think that's another way to partner with finance in sort of backing that up and making sure that if it's saving us money and it's helping out students' education and health, it's much easier to do. Don's leaving.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
So I think, just like with the AP classes, I think we all just have to be aware, we've had a tight budget for the past few years since I've been on finance, and I think we all have to work closely, but I think when we look at budget, that's what we have been working with. So when your committee is looking at things and you partner with us and administration and cost center managers, those are going to be great conversations to understand what's coming and what we may need to look at. Like Jim was saying, I think we've been all saying no net new, right? So we can't afford to put new things on without taking other things off. So I think it's just going to be a really good partnership for all of us going forward to talk through this. Dan and Tim have done an excellent job working with cost center managers and really being, all of us, having conversations through budget season on what's coming, what to be aware of, and what we may need to adjust for. So I think it's just going to be continued conversations around that.
Yeah, we've been creative with scheduling. Certain classes will offer every other year now. We do that with AP classes now.
And as you know, Dan and Tim look at numbers, and we do too, administratively as a school. And at the end of the day, if the class doesn't make, we'll try offering it next year. And a lot of the teachers and department chairs work really hard to meet the needs of all the students. And that's why, that's one of the great things about Keene High School is we have a robust course offering. And it's working right now, and it's an opportunity for a lot of students between the Career Center, the arts, the sciences. I mean, we're really fortunate. And I believe everybody at the school realizes that.
Yeah, I mean, my two pieces in scheduling, if going down the road, what you hear all the time from the elementary schools is there's not enough time. So that's something to be aware of. I don't know if I've had my pulse in the middle school as much. I know there's discussion always whether the 8-period day is the best way to do it. It certainly works now. I mean, it's something they could probably explore down the future. Having run a budget going from an 8-period day to a 6-period day, 6 periods are more expensive. The longer your periods are, it tends to be more expensive. So that's one of the reasons why the middle school is so cost effective, And obviously, yeah, I mean, the block scheduling has been on in the high school for years. I think, the competency is just going to force everyone to be a little bit more flexible and adaptable. So your schedule's got to do the same thing. How can you be more flexible and adaptable? Does every class need an 80-minute block? Do some? Probably. And I think those are kind of the resolutions you're going to have to come up with.
We'll probably talk about more of this in the fall, but what is easier for a high school teacher is change this year, and then another change the next year, and then another
Well, and
change
that's what
third
came up
year.
at the competency meeting, and that's,
Yeah.
we said we'll do it, and, we'll be, I guess, very linear in our approach on how this is going to all go down.
Yeah.
But right now, the focus is the competencies and the assessments that go along with that.
Because we want everything to complement
Correct.
how you're doing competencies. We don't want to have competencies and then start time messes that up. And then the next year,
The schedule.
if it switches to a different schedule, then messing that up. It would be a shame to put multiple years' worth of work only to have it topple down or get more complicated or add more stress. Dan's like, oh, thank God, I'm not going to be here.
I'll still be working though, these issues don't go away no matter where you go, so.
You had your hand, Christine?
I did. I'm trying to figure out. As we're talking about the competencies and the schedule, is it the concern about length? You mentioned the length of time. Some classes may need more or less time, but it's also about the succession. I mean, is that part of the scheduling issue, that if you're in a competency-based
Yeah.
system, planning out the succession of classes and cohorts of
Yep.
kids, and just all of a sudden,
Yep, definitely makes it harder. There definitely is an advantage to the 4x4 block, because if a kid wants to move really fast through math, they can. But we don't necessarily have the system to, if a kid doesn't do well that first semester, how do they catch up the second semester to make the move the next year? Those are the logistical things that are not in the schedule yet, that it's really going to force that issue.
and how do you fit it so that
Yeah.
you have the opportunities
Yeah.
for both types of
Yeah.
student
Yeah.
Yeah, and
in a
we're,
timely
for a
fashion?
year.
the math class has taken a lead with that a little bit with they're offering a competency-based math class right now, and
Right.
and they have the requirements, the competencies that have to be met to go on to the next level of math, and they have a remedial program in place if they don't meet the specific number of competencies for that class. So we're looking at that, and we'll, as we go down this school-wide, I think that you'll see structures put in place that's going to accommodate all the students.
I had competencies on my list, but we've already really talked about that as well. You guys are working on it. Any help you need, let us know. With attendance and behavior, that was brought up at our last meeting, and probably a big thing that I know in my visits to my school, I've talked about that with teachers since it came from my school. That's gonna be one we're working with policy to really get a hold of that policy, and that's probably one of the ways that, if Rob was here, I would look at him, that we can engage the faculty and the administration when they come in and make those presentations in a more meaningful way, is to talk about a policy that's going to help them and a policy that they can be engaged in, that they're observing, because those are two things that have become really big in the past year, as Dan said. So hit the ground running on that one. Any comments from you two? Observations, anything?
No, I mean, I think, like, the shorthand list I have right now is dual enrollment. I'm not sure that it's premature to talk about scheduling, but, if you do scheduling next year, I'm not sure if it's an end game, it would be a start. Continuing the competency work and attendance and behavior, those are four pretty meaty things to take on as a committee.
In addition to special education.
Yeah, and, Rick could make it tonight. I mean, that again, some of those things blur, but I mean, those are four big things,
Probably sort of the last thing, because I have co-teaching on here, but I think that sort of fits into the dual enrollment discussion as well, kind of. But the future of the preschool, which is also something to work with Dawn about, how we want to see that program expand, how we want it to look. It seems like 1 year into this new preschool model, and it's already exploding in a very positive way. And working with them to see what does the next 3 years look like.
I would suggest getting community input on that as well. What does the city want to see the school district offering for a preschool?
Exactly.
We'll continue to offer regardless because we need to offer for the needs of students. But we're well beyond those numbers right now.
Yep.
So what does the city want to see? What does the rest of our school district want to see? This is one of those times we don't really want to operate in a vacuum.
Yep.
Going to that, remember how Joanne talked about how she got together with all the preschools and started to form that? I think that is something we want to support.
Yeah.
If you go back to the presentation I made, like the most important things at that age, sure, academics play a part, but it's those self-control, self-reliance, grit. Those are the things that I think all preschools can kind of get behind and we could be a good partner with.
Yeah. And if we can work collaboratively, I mean, the future of our physical preschool, but also just 0 through 5 education across the entire city, and the fact that there are definitely ways that we can grow in monitoring students. We do a really good job. We set up systems, since Dan's been here, of monitoring K through 12 of all of our students through assessment, through what we do with them, but also maybe working with our partners to make that an even more robust model, where you have a child coming in at 6 months, building a more complete profile that maybe we can partner with institutions in the area that are working with that, so that we can track our students better, that we can know when they're coming in at an earlier time. And that's going to be a discussion of the future of the preschool, not only in its physical form, but also in its more outward form. How do we want that to expand as well? Because that's just setting up students to succeed even more.
Yep.
And I know we're hearing more and more about the social and emotional issues that the elementary schools are having. I've had a few conversations about somehow partnering and being able to reach out to these parents at a younger age. At 3, how do we reach those parents to be able to get the kids sort of tested, or I hate to use the words, or assessed, to see if they need help with the social and emotional growth a lot earlier before we get to kindergarten per se, and using the preschool in that way. Maybe just a resource for being able to get assistance. I don't know. That's a financial piece that we talk about, but
It's definitely as we look at what is the community's expectations of the preschool? What are the expectations of what the preschool offers? Is it being does the community want resources where it's like, I don't know what's going on with my child, I don't know what to do right now, help me.
right.
Just have to put in a reminder that we do have the Ready for Kindergarten program that is pretty amazing at running through some of the developmentally appropriate things that parents can do with children before they get to school, and it's pretty
We
nice.
also have Vroom now, don't we?
There's Vroom.
Title I.
Yes. So, there's a lot we can do there. And then I have a note for professional development, and I think that's more of, we hear a lot about what teachers are doing in individual schools and maybe attempting to propagate that and provide professional development opportunities that we can use our own talent for is always a great thing to do. Supporting that.
I know one of the things I struggle with as a board member is getting feedback from our community, and as my role as a board member, being able to assist on things like, yeah, why can't we use our own people for professional development? Is that my role to kind of push that through, or is that my role is to have the conversation with administration to then go back and say, well, this is how you get that information to them? If that makes sense. How are we supposed to be that, when you hear these things, and that's just one example, because I've heard that too, wanting more input, but as a board member, what is our role in helping that input get facilitated?
I think that, as Rob said, from a policy perspective, and in a way making it accessible for teachers to take advantage either of the experience that they already have, or I believe we have a sabbatical policy.
Yep, it's part of the contract, actually.
Yeah,
Yep.
part of the contract, and sort of providing an avenue and providing a very welcoming environment for our faculty to either do something that's going to develop themselves professionally and then make themselves a thought leader, or for those teachers that have found successful models in their classroom, and I know that there are plenty of teachers that have just found successful ways in providing an avenue to go to administration and feel supported in that way.
Right, I get that part, but I guess, and our role is just having those policies there and explaining that the policies are there. That's where it gets a little murky for me.
I mean, making sure that the policies fully support the teacher and support the administration as well in providing that clear avenue. We have a policy, and in the contract for sabbatical, does every teacher fully understand that or have that clear path and avenue? When it comes to getting your master's, is there a clear path? Is there a clear avenue? Is the policy supportive of that?
Right, yeah, now those types of things, I know
Looking
they're in the
over
contracts. Okay,
I mean, there's also the Professional Development Committee,
right,
which does articulate some of these things. There's the budget process, where principals have to put together their needs, so, I mean, there's lots of ways that this plays out. But you're asking, like...
right, what's my
Yeah.
direct role?
Yeah.
As a board member, it's a balancing act.
Yep.
Of remembering that our part of our duty is outreach and conversation, but the other side is the policy. So when it's addressed to us, what do we then do with it outside of the policies? And especially if they're already there. The policies are there, all these things are there. It's there, it's supported, is it just having that conversation? I don't know, am I not being clear?
No, you are.
But what do we do is the question.
Right, that's the question. Right, and also maybe having people understand what our roles are as a board member, because I think sometimes they think we can do more about some things than we can. And I say that in a sense of, we give the superintendent authority to do things in a broad way. And as a board, we're not micromanaging how he's doing it.
And I'm not saying that we should micromanage Rob or any administrator, but I also think that there has been this overlying issue of our professional development funds being used. And then I remember last year we were transferring out of professional development funds into other areas. So how are we using that money more efficiently? And how are we making sure that teachers are accessing it? Is there some sort of barrier that's keeping that from being used so that we don't get to the budget cycle and say, oh, this wasn't used, sorry, Jim, we're going to slash this professional development? And what are the barriers that are keeping administrators, teachers from accessing those funds? Because if they're not accessing it now, then there must be some sort of barrier.
So
that's being put up.
it's more of the conversation. For us, it's the conversation. Okay, that makes sense.
And if the policy is providing some sort of barrier.
Well, we don't have a professional development policy. You know, there's
Yeah.
nothing that actually, there's no policy. There are no barriers. There's just plans, you know? And it's like,
Time.
maybe they didn't feel part of the plan.
Time is your barrier.
Time.
Yeah, you know,
Your personal barriers.
yeah.
Yeah. But it's definitely, how do we?
Right.
And how do we make sure that that money's being used? Because we definitely want to make sure that teachers are, and administrators, are taking advantage of that fully,
I would say,
so that Dawn won't cut it.
So that's why we see all of those budget transfers, so we can ask.
well,
Yeah,
the
reporting.
hardest part for being on the board is that communication piece. I mean, that goes back to communication. It's there, we talk about it as far as it's in the contract, but we can't, people still aren't aware.
Oh. 30-page contract, and we talked about that at a meeting, where getting people to read the full contract is difficult.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, right, you had,
No, I'm
Oh.
good.
I think your broader philosophical question is going to be one of the major focuses of the retreat later this week. How do we solicit input? What do we do with the input
We get.
that we get? You know, in a sense, what do we do?
right.
You know, getting at the essence of what our job is, and that's part of it when we liaison with people in the community. And most of the current board has talked about wanting to do that more. Either that's why they ran, or now that they're on the board, they realize they need to do it more. But how do we actually do that effectively? And that's in one form or another. Most of you sent priorities that touched on that. So that's going to be part of our discussion on Thursday night.
I just think it's always important with whatever policies we are creating or overseeing, that we're really clear that we are reflecting the educational values of this community in the best way that we can. And so, yeah, that's the conversation.
That was the list that I had.
Okay.
We had policies, and IKF is the one that's perennially there.
Yeah, I think we put it there knowing that it has been given to us. At some point, this committee has to do something with it. Right now, it's stated.
At some point.
At some point, you know, I mean, I think next year you could probably talk more in depth with Jim and Jan around that interaction between community ed and the high school for graduation. But, yeah, I mean, I think when the competencies are more clearly articulated, it's really going to change this policy dramatically.
Yes.
Goes back to what Jim was talking about with you guys about not wanting to undo work after you've done it.
Yep.
This policy will be significantly affected by competencies and by scheduling.
Yep.
You know, if we change the way that we schedule significantly, then the number of credits a student can reasonably earn also changes
Yep.
significantly.
Yep. Yep, for sure.
Something to keep in the back of your mind is, you know, you won't look at it too much this year probably, but there's a board member who approached me about possibly working on getting a 3-year graduation plan in place. So that would tie into IKF as well. You know, obviously, it's not particularly fleshed out, has not been brought to Mr. Logan yet. But as we move to competencies, it is something that may come up. So that's out there too.
And IKF doesn't, there's nothing like additional that's being used now, there's like nothing that's changing until competencies boom.
Yeah, there's no changes in
Unless-
mind for graduation requirements at
Not
this
changing
time.
There's like no like,
Graduation
oh, we're
yet.
increasing hours
No, no, no,
for
there's nothing to
working
increase.
by an hour.
Nothing to increase.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just adopted changes to it 2 years ago, I think.
No.
Last year. Was that, yeah,
Was
last
it
year.
under,
Yeah, it's right, it was with
Right,
the
the
whole
transition.
inclusion and walking graduation thing.
Yeah.
That was the last time we did
Last
it.
year.
That's right.
Okay.
The only other thing that could happen is the state could say,
Yep.
you're
Is that-
required to
That's-
add
Yep, yep.
something else.
That was kind of
That's
Wouldn't
how that
surprise
sort
me.
of happened.
with the civics.
yeah, we've done a lot of work
discussions.
with that, with the civics and economics, and the social studies department's working really hard now to change things up.
Does any of that need to be sort of
No, that's
looked
just,
at, changed, or is this just fine until we get to
fine.
competencies?
I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. JEB, age of entrance.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta have to have a good conversation about what we're looking for if we're gonna give a pass to the hard line. Which I think is a good conversation. It's very related to the competency one of the high school. But, you're opening up just a Pandora's box of we're gonna function differently with 5-year-olds,
Mm-hmm. So this one's also sort of waiting to see.
I mean, my recommendation
Water
is, find a way to gather the input from your elementary principals, gather your input from Dottie and Rob,
Mhm.
and then figure out if there's anything you want to touch or change in the coming year. Because I don't know if what we saw in, was it May?
Yeah.
If that is more to come, or if it's once every couple of years,
It seems like we have at least one every year so far.
Oh, I was just going to say, but, in addressing those situations is really just making some changes in the language that we have here to address some of the factors that allow us to make those decisions, and then it can change further later, but that change might not be too difficult with input from the principals.
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to be flexible, you have to articulate how you want to be flexible.
Yeah. And how do we screen for
Yep.
flexibility?
Yep, yep.
Because right now we don't really we have screening in quotes. We don't really have a screening in the sense of your child is not 5, are they truly prepared to come to kindergarten?
Yep.
That's not what we screen for.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's always good for it all. Nope.
Maybe that's something that we solicit both the preschool
Yep.
and elementary school principals
Yep.
on what would work.
Yep.
Do they want to develop a screening? Do they want students under the age of 5?
Never know.
They want
Yeah.
kids who are ready for kindergarten.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
I've seen this policy before, and usually the only way around it is to put your kid in a private school. I mean, most public schools are pretty,
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, it is what it is, and they don't bend it. And the only way around it is to put your kid in a private school for kindergarten.
In other
And
places?
they start the next year in
Yeah.
public school. I mean, that's pretty hard, and that's typically not the way
Yeah.
we work in this community.
Well, that was my advice to the family. Like, if, either go all the way with the board or be prepared to go kindergarten, private school, basically,
Yeah.
But at a time when we're worried about enrollment levels, if they do that 1 year, you may never see them
Get 'em
again.
back.
Yep.
Right.
For sure.
And if the parents are right about their children, you've just lost one of your brighter students.
Yeah,
So-
for sure. Exactly.
Very true. So we're going to have a great discussion about this, I'm sure. Jim's saying,
that's
I
not
only
my
have to worry about, I have to worry about the end. It's literally, we have the beginning and the end, literally sitting. I am the alpha and the omega. Do we have a reason to go into non-public?
We have no reason to go into non-public.
Oh, I was really hoping. Any others? Then, with seeing no other public input, we are,
What?
6:53.
It's It's okay.
We need to talk for
We-
7 minutes sometime.
We are adjourned until August?
Did you set a date for August? Someone was asking.
I haven't set a date for August. We're adjourned till August.